On June 6, 2025, a wave of fear swept through the vibrant immigrant communities of Los Angeles. Under the early morning sun, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents launched a series of large-scale raids across the city. They targeted neighborhoods long known as sanctuaries for hardworking families, from the bustling Fashion District to the residential streets of Compton and Paramount. Near Home Depot locations, where day laborers gather hoping for a day's wage, federal vehicles descended, and hundreds of individuals were apprehended. The operation was swift and overwhelming, designed to send a clear message from the federal government about its hardline immigration stance. The news spread like wildfire, carried by frantic phone calls, social media alerts, and the terrifying sight of families being torn apart on the streets they called home. The reaction from the community was immediate and deeply emotional. For many Angelenos, this was not just a law enforcement action. It was an assault on the very fabric of their city, a place built by generations of immigrants from every corner of the globe. Pro-immigrant activists and advocacy groups, such as the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, quickly mobilized, organizing Know Your Rights campaigns and offering legal support. But beyond the organized response, a raw, spontaneous anger began to build. People who had lived in the shadows for years, alongside their documented neighbors and allies, felt a profound sense of betrayal and injustice. The sight of federal agents targeting people simply trying to work and provide for their families struck a nerve deep within the city's soul. What started as localized fear quickly coalesced into a citywide movement of defiance. That Friday evening, thousands of people began to gather in public squares and outside federal buildings. The initial protests were peaceful, filled with families, children, and community leaders. They carried signs reading "Immigrants are welcome here" and chanted slogans demanding an end to the raids. It was a powerful display of solidarity, a testament to Los Angeles' identity as a city of immigrants. People from all walks of life, citizens, legal residents, and the undocumented, stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices united in a plea for compassion and a rebuke of the federal government's aggressive tactics. The air was thick with a mix of sorrow for those detained and a determined resolve to fight back. This initial phase of peaceful demonstration was a poignant reflection of a community pushed to its breaking point. Street vendors, often the most vulnerable to enforcement actions, were seen handing out water and offering aid to fellow protesters affected by the growing tension. Migrant families, many of whom had fled violence and instability in their home countries, now faced a different kind of threat in the city they had come to seeking safety. The peaceful gatherings were a collective cry for recognition of their humanity, a demand to be seen not as criminals, but as integral members of the Los Angeles community. However, beneath this surface of peaceful resistance, a more volatile anger simmered, ready to boil over as the weekend approached and the federal presence intensified. As the weekend of June 7th and 8th unfolded, the atmosphere in Los Angeles shifted dramatically. The peaceful vigils and organized marches gave way to a more chaotic and confrontational energy. The catalyst for this change was the visible and unyielding presence of federal authorities, which many protesters viewed as an occupation of their city. The demonstrations swelled in size, with thousands of people flooding the downtown area, their initial pleas for peace turning into roars of outrage. The 101 freeway, a major artery of the city, became a focal point of the unrest. Crowds of protesters surged onto the highway, bringing traffic to a standstill for miles and creating a powerful, disruptive symbol of their anger that was broadcast across the nation. The protests soon escalated into widespread violence and property destruction, transforming parts of downtown into a chaotic battleground. The air filled with the acrid smell of smoke as vehicles were set on fire. In a particularly symbolic act, several Waymo autonomous taxis, seen by some as symbols of a disconnected corporate world, were overturned and engulfed in flames. Protesters, their faces often masked, hurled Molotov cocktails, rocks, and fireworks at police lines. The chants became more aggressive, with some shouting "Death to America" as they targeted federal property. Courthouses and LAPD stations were vandalized, their windows smashed and walls covered in graffiti, marking a direct assault on the institutions protesters blamed for their suffering. The demographics of the crowd were complex and varied, reflecting the multifaceted nature of the conflict. Alongside the legal immigrants and migrant families who had initiated the peaceful protests were pro-immigrant activists and more radical groups like Antifa, who brought more confrontational tactics to the demonstrations. Some protesters raised the flags of other nations, including Mexico, not as a rejection of America, but as a symbol of solidarity with the targeted immigrant communities and a defiant display of their heritage. This mix of participants created a volatile dynamic, where peaceful intentions could be quickly overshadowed by the actions of a more militant faction, making it difficult for law enforcement to distinguish between peaceful demonstrators and violent agitators. In response to the escalating violence, law enforcement agencies declared an unlawful assembly in downtown Los Angeles. The LAPD, along with other local agencies, deployed crowd control measures in an attempt to disperse the massive crowds. The sharp crack of rubber bullets and the boom of flashbang grenades echoed through the city streets, followed by clouds of tear gas that sent protesters scattering, choking, and crying. Journalists covering the events were caught in the crossfire, with several reporters injured by the very tactics meant to restore order. The clashes resulted in dozens of injuries among both police officers and civilians, and at least 72 arrests were made, further fueling the cycle of confrontation and resentment that had gripped the city. The crisis in Los Angeles escalated into an unprecedented political showdown when President Trump, citing the need to restore order and secure federal property, made a controversial decision. He ordered the deployment of 2,000 National Guard troops and 700 active-duty Marines from Camp Pendleton and 29 Palms to the city. This move was made without the request or consent of California's state government, a stark departure from historical precedent, like the 1992 riots, where federal assistance was explicitly requested by the state. The arrival of military personnel on the streets of an American city, tasked with supporting ICE operations, was seen by many as a frightening overreach of federal power and a direct challenge to state sovereignty. California's leadership reacted with fury and legal action. Governor Gavin Newsom publicly condemned the deployment as unconstitutional and un-American, immediately announcing that the state would file lawsuits to halt the presence of both the National Guard and the Marines. He emphasized that the state had the situation under control and had not asked for federal intervention. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass echoed this sentiment, declaring that her city was being used as a test case for unauthorized federal militarization. She and LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell criticized the complete lack of coordination from the federal government, stressing that the LAPD was not involved in civil immigration enforcement and that the federal presence was only making a volatile situation worse. The conflict between federal and local authorities played out on the city's streets and in its political chambers. While federal troops secured courthouses and other government buildings, local leaders worked to de-escalate the situation and reassure their terrified residents. Mayor Bass and Chief McDonnell publicly reaffirmed Los Angeles' status as a sanctuary city, a promise that local police would not act as immigration agents. In a direct rebuke to federal policy, the nearby city of Glendale voted to terminate its agreement with ICE to house immigration detainees in its city jail. The Los Angeles City Council scheduled emergency meetings to address the raids and their fallout, attempting to assert local control in the face of federal intrusion. This deep division was reflected in the broader political landscape. Prominent California Democrats, including Senator Kamala Harris and Representatives Adam Schiff and Maxine Waters, labeled the federal action authoritarian and a war on the people. They accused the administration of using military force to intimidate political opponents and vulnerable communities. Conversely, California Republicans argued that the state's sanctuary policies had invited lawlessness and that the federal government was right to step in. This political polarization mirrored the division in the streets, creating a city and a state at war with itself, caught between local values of inclusion and a federal agenda of aggressive enforcement, with the people of Los Angeles trapped in the middle. In the days following the intense riots, a tense quiet fell over Los Angeles, but the city was left with deep and visible scars. Downtown businesses were boarded up, their windows shattered and inventories looted, with owners reporting devastating financial losses. The charred skeletons of burned vehicles, including the now infamous Waymo taxis, were a stark reminder of the weekend's fury. The suspension of the autonomous taxi service was just one example of how the unrest disrupted the city's daily life and its image as a hub of technological innovation. The physical damage was extensive, but it was the damage to the city's sense of security and unity that would prove much harder to repair. The events left a mark not just on the landscape, but on the psyche of every Angelino. Beyond the physical destruction, a pervasive climate of fear settled over the city's immigrant communities. Families became afraid to leave their homes, keeping their children from school and avoiding work for fear of being swept up in another ICE raid. Public spaces that were once vibrant centers of community life became places of anxiety. In response, local institutions fought back. The Los Angeles Unified School District took the bold step of blocking ICE from attending graduation events to protect its students and their families. Advocacy groups like the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights intensified their outreach, ensuring that even the most isolated individuals knew their rights. The city became a patchwork of fear and resilience, with communities simultaneously hiding and organizing. The arrests made during the raids and protests highlighted the personal stakes of the conflict. David Huerta, a respected labor union leader, was federally charged with conspiracy after being arrested during a raid, his case becoming a rallying cry for activists. In another high-profile incident, a Los Angeles City Council aide, Luz Aguilar, was arrested along with her sister for allegedly assaulting an officer during the protests, leading to their immediate suspension from their jobs. These cases demonstrated how the conflict reached into every level of society, implicating not just anonymous protesters, but also figures within the city's own civic and labor structures, blurring the lines between dissent and criminality in the eyes of federal prosecutors. Ultimately, the Los Angeles riots of June 2025 became more than a local crisis. They became a defining moment for the nation. The events brought the simmering conflicts over immigration, states' rights, and federal authority to a boiling point. Los Angeles stood as a symbol of the deep divisions in American society, a place where sanctuary city policies clashed directly with a federal administration determined to enforce its will by any means necessary, including military deployment. The sight of U.S. Marines on American streets, deployed against the wishes of local government, raised profound questions about the limits of presidential power and the future of American democracy. The fires have been extinguished, but the debate they ignited now burns across the country.